Hello, my name is Russell Tucker. I am based in Pittsburgh, and I am currently working at Bayer, where I am a software engineer. So in my current role at Bayer, we work on an application for radiology dose management. It is an application that your doctor or radiologist or maybe a hospital technician would use to, among some other things, they would check to make sure that you're not receiving a dangerous amount of radiation when you go in for some kind of radiology scan, a CT scan or an X-ray scan or something of that like. It does a lot of monitoring to make sure individual patients don't receive dangerous amounts. There's also all kinds of different, I'll call them like macro monitoring features, different charts and graphs and tables that show you different information and data over time. So all kinds of different data visualizations based around all kinds of different parameters. Different things like you could look at one patient who has gone in for several tests over time. You could look at many patients who have received the same dosage of some kind of radiology scan over time. So all kinds of different data visualizations. In my role, I am something of a front-end technical lead. Our positions are a little bit loose. They're not so strict about who does what. But our technology stack is JavaScript and React on the front end. It is Java and Postgres on the back end. So as I mentioned, I am something of a front-end technical lead. I do assist with the management and leadership of our team members, especially when it comes to the front-end development, but not exclusively. I work on the full stack, so I work on the back-end part and the database part. So I do get exposure with that as well. And yeah. So about code testing and automated code deployment. I'll start with code deployment. In my current role, we do have a continuous deployment and continuous integration environment. So we are continuously deploying code changes that go out at regular intervals. So I'm familiar with that process. We use Jenkins in our current environment, and we're everyone on the team is familiar with that setup. So we know if someone breaks something that breaks the code deployment, we all get alerts about it, and we all get notified about it, and we can all sort of swarm over what the potential problem might be, and usually learn something in the end of it as well. And on code testing, well, let's talk about what I do in my current role. In my current role, we do code testing on an individual basis. So as individual developers, we all write different code tests. We do unit tests and integration tests based on what is appropriate for what we're developing at the time. We're never really aiming for 100% code coverage. In my personal opinion, I think that tends to be a bit more fragile than valuable. And in addition to the individual tests that we all write and maintain, unit tests, integration tests, we also do a form of black box testing, which we have a team of automated tests that focus, or automated testers that focus on writing those tests. But all in all, I say those would work up to a coding strategy that makes sure that nothing breaks unexpectedly, and if something does break, we get all the alarm bells going off to tell us when it did and what happened. So a major obstacle in one of our projects, I'll talk about a feature that I worked on recently. Was a feature for being able to maintain state of different components as you navigate around our application. It's something I took on the task of doing. The feature ask was just that, to maintain state of different components as you navigate around the app. And it's something that I designed the core infrastructure for, but I designed it so that any of our developers could pick it up and use it and customize it however they wanted to. One of the main challenges in it, I picked up this feature and I started understanding the different technical requirements. So I gave myself sort of an outline of what we would need to get it done. And I immediately recognized a few different technical requirements that we were going to need to get this done. The first was some kind of global store to put component state in. I considered things like Redux, JavaScript globals, but there's probably a good reason why you shouldn't use those generally. The second was a way of uniquely identifying each component, because each component is not a singleton. You need to be able to say, associate some saved state with that component, not a different component. And finally, we needed to be able to recognize a place in a user's browser history, because we needed to distinguish between going back to a page versus going to the same page anew. So with that in mind, I started exploring options for the store, and I decided to use HTML5 location state because it inherently tracks the user's current location in their browser history. So with that in mind, we could knock out that requirement. I just had to worry about writing the code to interact between these two. And with that done, I had a very simple interface that other developers could use and implement this feature, extend the feature however they needed. So my experience with front-end development with React and server-side development with Node. Um, so I have a great amount of experience using React. I use that currently in my current role with Bayer, and I've used it in side projects as well. My experience with server-side development, I've used Node.js to develop a side project of mine called SmartList. Ask me more about it. And so I've been working with that for a few years as well. I would, if I had to choose between the two, I would probably say development with React on the front end, and the reason would be because it's much more structured, and I would go so far as to say I think there is a good reason that it's so structured, and that's because frameworks like React uh, have worked out most of the major problems that a UI framework needs to address. Not that they are complete solutions by any means, but React and I'll say most of the front-end frameworks, Angular and Vue, give you a good structure for arranging your front-end components. The way that it handles props and state and passing things from one component to the next, it gives you a good outline for how you should develop your components in a front-end system. By contrast, server-side development with Node, it's a bit more open-ended. There are some good practices, there are some best things you should do and the best ways to arrange your code, but compared to React, there's a lot less. And like I said, it's more open-ended, which can be good, but it can be a double-edged sword as well, because any developer can write things any way they wish, which can lead to some real problems if you're not careful. When I'm not in the office, what are some of my hobbies? Well, one of my big ones is dogs. I have four dogs that live here with me and my wife. We have four dachshunds in total. I guess I keep forgetting. Um, and so they are adorable. They take up a good amount of our time. And so that's a fun hobby to get to spend some time on. Other than that, I enjoy playing video games as well. I'm a big Nintendo fan, mostly the classics. So Mario and Zelda games, I will always be up on the latest ones of those. Um, but I will also gripe about how the old ones were definitely better. Um, and other than that, I'm also a big fan of stand-up comedy as well. Um, yeah, if you're looking for any stand-up recommendations, I would highly recommend John Mulaney. On that, there are some really funny people out there. So for that coding problem, the first step in the problem was to parse the JSON block that we're getting from the input. That did that with json.parse, and that can be optimized later on. We can add some more detail to that. We could, for example, we could wrap it in a try-catch block just in case there is a problem with the input. That would catch the errors that might happen, and we could do something with it. Then we could, decide to exit the program or do something else with it based on that input. So after we've parsed the JSON input, then we go through each of the different menu items and add the IDs together. I did this with a .reduce function. I greatly enjoy the .reduce function, as well as the other corresponding ones, .map and .filter, because they are so functional and declarative. It's very easy to tell what's going on with this code when you're just reading through it. The use, you could have used just a for loop, but it's not immediately obvious what you're doing with that for loop. On the other hand, using reduce makes it obvious what you're doing. You are going through a list of objects and performing some function on them. In this case, it's to add them into one variable together, which I called ID counter. And we can, in the code I used, I set it to a default of 0. You can also control that behavior. So it could start as undefined if you wanted to. And with that, we get our variable called ID counter that produces the number that we're looking for. The last thing is to convert it to a string before printing it to the console output. And that is it. Oh, and I should mention in my if statement within the .reduce, I just did a simple check for current .label. So the .label of each menu item. You could do a more specific check there, because that will, the if statement I've got right there will let an empty string pass through the if statement. It won't count the ID if the label is an empty string. So if that's not desired, we could update that if statement. You could do something else like check if label is not undefined, something along those lines. You could do a not single equals, not double equals, not equal null, because that checks if the value is either null or undefined. All right, so to solve this problem, I arranged my code into a couple different methods. To start it off, I've got my main method called isValidLoon, which is going to check if that credit card number that's inputted is indeed a valid credit card number. So that's the main method, and then it's going to split off into helper methods that I've defined to do specific tasks, because single responsibility principle is good, and those methods could be reused in other places. So going through the isValidLoon, the first thing, we input the credit card number as a string, and we reverse that string so that we can start going through the digits one by one, set up our sum variables, and set up a for loop so we can go through each individual character. I did use a for loop for this and not a .map or a .reduce. You could have done it with a .map or a .reduce, but you would have had to return an object, which then returns or contains two sums, S1 and S2. We could argue back and forth about which is more readable. I thought the for loop was more readable, so that's what I went with here. So in this for loop, we look at what each individual character is. We check if it's odd or not based on the index, and then we add it either to S1 or S2. If we add it to S2, then we are going to multiply it by 2 and run it through the helper function called sumDigits, which, just as the Loon algorithm describes, it should detect if the number is 10 or greater, if it's got 2 digits or more, and then take those digits and add them all together. Within this function, I used a while loop so that this method could be used for other number inputs that are larger than just 2 digits. And it would keep on adding those digits together until it got down to just a single digit number. Won't have much use case here, but it could be reused in other places. So with our sumDigits function, and using that, every time we loop through each character, we construct our S1 sum and our S2 sum. And then finally, we add those two together, and we check the final digit of that final sum. I did that by doing a mod 10, since we know that this is going to be an integer. Mod 10 will give us the last digit in that integer, and we can check if that last digit is 0. And if it is, then it's valid. If not, then it's invalid. I had my function isValidLoon return a Boolean because I want it to be reusable in other places, And other consumers of this function might not want the string valid or invalid. So I have that defined outside of isValidLoon as a caller pattern. Yes, I confirm you may use this video for hiring and evaluation purposes.